May 6, 1945, Ziegenhain Airfield, Hessen, Germany. The rain had just stopped falling when Major Thomas Greaves stepped onto the cracked runway of Ziegenhain Airfield. Smoke still curled from a distant hangar, the scent of scorched rubber and engine oil hanging heavy in the air. What was left of the once proud Luftwaffe base lay in ruins: burned-out aircraft, overturned fuel drums, crumpled anti-aircraft guns. But that wasn't what made Greaves stop mid-step. It was the jet. The aircraft sat alone in a cordoned-off hangar, guarded by two MPs who clearly didn't understand what they were protecting. Greaves, a seasoned combat pilot turned intelligence attaché, was used to strange sights. But this thing looked like it had crash-landed from another century. Its wings swept backward with unnatural elegance. Twin nacelles jutted from beneath like oversized fists. The nose was stubby and predatory, with air intakes that seemed to swallow light. There were no propellers, and no markings save for a serial number hastily scratched into the panel near the cockpit. Greaves approached slowly, boots echoing against concrete still damp with condensation. The German mechanic who had led them there was shaking slightly, more from exhaustion than fear. He was young, barely more than a boy, and wore a Luftwaffe jumpsuit that looked 3 sizes too big. "Was ist das?" Greaves asked, his German passable but rough. The mechanic didn't answer. He only pointed to the jet, then to the sky. "Nicht normal," he muttered. "Nicht aus dieser Zeit. Not normal, not from this time." Greaves raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, not from this time?" The mechanic didn't elaborate. He just walked away. Later that afternoon, under orders from Allied High Command, the aircraft was secured, photographed, and labeled under a new designation: Subject Blackbird. It wasn't a Messerschmitt 262. At least, not like the others they had seen littering the German countryside. Greaves had inspected a few himself: ruined husks, abandoned when the fuel ran out or the pilots deserted. But this one was different. The engines alone were enough to make his blood run cold. They didn't match the Jumo 004Bs used in standard Me 262's. The turbines were more compact, the wiring too precise, the alloy plating layered with some unfamiliar sheen that shimmered even in shadow. There were no bolts holding the panels together, only smooth seams, as if the plane had been grown, not built. Inside the cockpit, things got stranger. The control panel was labeled in German, yes, but the arrangement was unlike any Luftwaffe cockpit Greaves had ever seen. The instrumentation was minimal. No altitude gauge, no artificial horizon. Instead, a narrow, glassy strip ran across the dash like a dark mirror. When one of the engineers accidentally brushed it with a gloved hand, the strip lit up in red, displaying symbols that flickered and rearranged themselves before shutting off. The moment was brief, but it froze the room. The next morning, a team from Operation Lusty, America's top-secret effort to capture and exploit German aviation technology, arrived from right field. They took one look at the jet and went pale. One of them, a physicist from MIT named Dr. Milton Harris, leaned in to inspect the exposed turbine and muttered, "This can't be right. Not with 1945 metallurgy." The turbine blades, normally dull and matte in regular 262's, were instead coated in a flawless, mirror-like finish, polished to a surgical sheen, yet there wasn't a single rivet or weld. When they tried cutting into one of the blades to test its composition, the saw blade snapped in two. Clean, no resistance, no sparks. Just nothing. "What the hell is this thing made of?" someone asked. Dr. Harris didn't answer. He just stared into the dark engine casing and whispered, "This isn't from any factory on Earth." Greaves wasn't a superstitious man. He had flown through flak over Berlin, dodged Messerschmitts, buried friends with bullet holes in their backs. But something about this aircraft stirred a fear in him that went deeper than war. This wasn't just technology. It was a message, and it didn't come from Berlin. They moved the jet under heavy guard to a makeshift hangar built inside an old brewery just outside Kassel. Officially, it was designated as a standard Luftwaffe recovery operation. But inside, behind black curtains and under the hiss of acetylene torches, a different kind of war was brewing. A team of 9 engineers, scientists, and intelligence officers had been assigned to Subject Blackbird. No uniforms, no insignia, just hard faces and clipboards that never stopped scribbling. Greaves sat in the corner, more observer than participant, but the lead on site. His orders were clear: keep quiet, gather what you can, and report directly to right field. No military brass. No press. They started with the engines. One of the mechanics, a former Army Air Forces tech named Parker, was the first to admit it. "This ain't a Jumo, sir," he said, eyes wide. "Hell, this ain't even German." Greaves frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if the Nazis built this, then they've got material science 15 years ahead of us. Maybe 20. The first piece of engine casing they managed to cut loose went straight to a metallurgist from Bell Labs. When the test results came back, the room fell silent. "No known alloy match," the report read. "Contains trace isotopes not found in Earth-origin materials. Structural composition suggests atomic layer precision manufacturing. Techniques currently theoretical." Dr. Harris, the physicist, broke protocol that evening and handed Greaves a cigarette with shaking hands. "If they made this," he said, voice low, "we're not fighting the same war. This plane? It's not a prototype. It's a prototype of a prototype. This is like finding a space shuttle in the middle of the Civil War." Worse was what they found in the nose cone. After 3 days of carefully disassembling the forward section, Parker and 2 others removed a sealed canister wedged behind the gun mounts. It wasn't bolted in. It fit there, flush and seamless, as if inserted during construction. The canister wasn't metal, at least not any metal they could identify. It was warm to the touch, pulsed faintly when held in darkness. One of the techs, Miller, a quiet guy with a math degree, swore it was reacting to proximity. "Like it knows you're holding it," he said. Greaves had them isolated immediately, wrapped in lead, locked in a triple-sealed crate, and driven to Frankfurt under armed escort. No one knew what it was, but it wasn't meant to be found. That same night, one of the engineers vanished. Johansson, Swedish-born, British-trained, was assigned to engine diagnostics. He didn't report for breakfast. His cot hadn't been slept in. His notes were missing. His duffel was still packed. Greaves called in the MPs. They combed the facility, then the airfield, then the surrounding farms. Nothing. No sign of a struggle. No sign of him walking out. He had simply disappeared. Parker, who'd been working late in the hangar, mentioned something odd. "I thought I saw someone in the cockpit just before midnight," he said. "Figured it was Johansson pulling another all-nighter. But when I walked in, it was empty." Greaves said nothing. But he didn't sleep that night. The aircraft was grounded, fully secured, and draped in blackout tarps. Even then, the MPs reported hearing sounds from the sealed hangar, a low hum, a distant crackling like static. No one was willing to go in alone. 1 week after arrival, they attempted a systems test. Greaves was there, along with Dr. Harris and 2 other scientists. They connected a portable generator to the power interface, grounded everything, and flicked the breaker. The hangar lights flickered. The floor vibrated. A deep, thrumming bass rolled through the concrete like thunder underground. And then the cockpit lit up. Not just lights. Displays. Screens with symbols they couldn't translate. One panel displayed what looked like a map, but not of Germany. Not even Earth. Lines and arcs drawn in 3 dimensions, hovering just above the dashboard like a hologram. Dr. Harris turned pale. This isn't Nazi tech. This is not terrestrial." Greaves looked at the machine again, not as a soldier, Not as a pilot, as a man. And he realized something bone deep. This jet hadn't been designed to fly. It had been placed, delivered, maybe, left behind, or worse, forgotten. Behind, or worse, forgotten. Parker didn't come to work the next day. At first, no one thought much of it. He'd been working non-stop, barely sleeping, running diagnostics, taking radiation readings, and tinkering with turbine components he didn't understand, but couldn't stop trying to. They figured he'd passed out somewhere, maybe on a cot, maybe in a supply closet. But by noon, when his bunk was still untouched, and his badge was found near the sealed hangar's entrance, Greaves felt it again. That same pulse in the air, the same deep unease that had followed them since they uncovered the aircraft. Parker was the second man to vanish in 3 days. There was no evidence of forced entry, no blood, no mess, just absence. Like Johansson before him, Parker had ceased to exist. Greaves locked the base down. No one in or out. He radioed Operation Lusty and requested immediate backup, along with high-clearance science advisors. The reply came back cryptic. Secure the artifact. Evacuation orders pending. No mention of the missing personnel. No questions asked. That night, the humming returned. The MPs refused to go near the hangar. Not after the last one collapsed during a midnight patrol, convulsing on the floor and speaking in tongues that none of the medics could identify. They'd sedated him and flown him to an army hospital in Rems, but before the chopper lifted off, he clawed at Greaves and whispered something that would live in the Major's memory forever. It's not ours. It wants to go home. Greaves stood in the shadows of the hangar, staring at the covered mass inside. The tarp rippled gently, though there was no wind. He could hear the faint, persistent whine beneath the concrete. Not mechanical, not electrical. Like a tuning fork buried too deep to dig out, Dr. Harris was unraveling. He'd started writing symbols all over his bunk wall. Circles, lines, strange patterns. When Greaves asked him what it meant, Harris only smiled and said, "It's a language, Tom. We're not reading it. It's reading us." That was the last straw. The plane had to be moved. They called in a convoy. 6 trucks, 2 armored cars, and a cargo plane waiting at a remote strip in Wiesbaden. The goal was simple: crate it up, haul it out, and bury it in some basement under right field until someone smarter could figure it out. But the moment the mechanics tried lifting the aircraft, everything changed. The winches failed. Not broke, melted. Steel cables turned to black goo in seconds. The dolly snapped in half, and then the engines began spinning. Slowly. On their own. No one touched the cockpit. No one was inside. Yet the turbines whirled up like they had in the hangar that night. Lights flickered. Radios shorted. One of the armored trucks simply died, smoke pouring from the dash as every circuit burned out. The hum deepened into a bone-vibrating growl. The tarps burst into flames, spontaneous combustion without a spark. The aircraft was awake. Greaves ordered everyone out, but Harris stayed behind. He walked right up to the thing, barefoot and trembling, eyes fixed on the glowing cockpit. "It's not a weapon," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a beacon, a message. And we're the fools that answered it." The aircraft pulsed once, blinding white light erupting from every seam. Windows shattered. Men screamed. Radios burst. And when the light died, Dr. Harris was gone. Not a trace left. Not a footprint. Just a scorch mark where he stood. By morning, Operation Lusty had changed its orders. Subject Blackbird was never to be moved again. Not studied, not touched. The facility was sealed. The scientists reassigned. The witnesses debriefed under threat of treason. The official report read, "Prototype Me 262 variant, scrapped due to instability and lack of verifiable design data. No surviving components of interest." Greaves retired a year later, never flying again. but he kept one thing, Harris's final notebook. And on the last page, written in perfect block script, was a single phrase, not in English, not in German, but in the same strange symbols from the cockpit interface. He'd had it translated by a linguist in 47. It read, "We are watching what you do with fire." The hangar stood silent for months after the incident. No personnel were assigned, no guards posted. The only visitors were crows that circled overhead, avoiding the structure like it carried a disease. The locals whispered about strange lights at night, about engines spinning with no fuel, about people going in and not coming out. And then, in October 1945, the doors opened again, but not for soldiers. A small convoy of unmarked vehicles arrived under cover of fog. No insignias, no flags, just men in black suits, clean shoes, and blank stares. They weren't military. Greaves could tell from the way they moved. They didn't check weapons, didn't salute, didn't even carry sidearms. But they had authority, the kind that didn't need explaining. They called themselves the Continuity Division, though no one had ever heard of such a thing. Their credentials passed through every Allied checkpoint without question. Greaves watched from a distance as they entered the sealed hangar without protective gear, without even hesitation. One of them stopped at the door and glanced back at Greaves, just briefly. He looked young, maybe 30, but his eyes were old, older than the war, older than fear. That night, Greaves broke into the hangar one last time. The guards had been replaced by motion detectors, cameras, infrared tripwires, but Greaves knew the layout. He had been there at the beginning. He'd signed the first manifest, logged the first flight data, touched the first blade of that impossible engine. Inside, everything had changed. The aircraft no longer sat in the open. It was suspended, not by chains or scaffolding, but by light. Thin beams of glowing blue energy projected from steel pylons, arranged in a circular pattern on the floor. The jet hovered mid-air, motionless, like a crucifix on display, and surrounding it were men, the suits, watching, writing. One was holding a Geiger counter, another a strange device that looked like a slide rule mated with a stethoscope. None of them spoke. They moved around the aircraft as if performing a ritual. But what caught Greaves's eye wasn't the aircraft. It was the engine, because one of the nacelles, ripped open for inspection, was no longer empty. It had grown something. The metallic internals had shifted. They weren't tubes and wires anymore. They looked organic, almost vascular. Veins of copper-red alloy pulsed like they carried blood. The turbine blades had changed too, no longer symmetrical, but curved like shells or bone. Breathing. Very faintly. This wasn't metallurgy. It was biology. Greaves backed away, heart hammering. As he turned, he saw the youngest of the suits standing in his path. Same man from earlier. No surprise on his face, just a look of grim recognition. As if he'd known Greaves would return. As if something else had known too. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. Not a threat. A warning. "What is this?" Greaves asked. His voice cracked. "What the hell did they build?" The man didn't answer. He simply said, "They didn't build it." Greaves stared at him. "Then who did?" The man looked past him, toward the aircraft suspended in blue light. "I don't think they know," he said. "I don't think we're supposed to." He handed Greaves a sealed envelope. "No markings, no return address. For your silence," the man said. "And your sanity." Greaves took it. He never opened it. Years passed. The war ended. America surged into the atomic age. Jets replaced propellers. Missiles replaced bombs. But in the quiet corners of Wright Field and Freeman Field, whispers of subject, Blackbird persisted. Pilots claimed to hear strange frequencies on radio channels they weren't tuned to. Technicians reported missing time while working in storage bunkers. Minutes, lost with no explanation. A private memo, dated 1947, referenced a second artifact found in the wreckage of a V-2 test facility in Peenemünde. Identical turbine geometry to subject Blackbird. But the missile it was found in had never flown, because it had never been built. The facility records showed no trace of it. Nothing on blueprints, nothing in inventory, just a single line in pencil, scribbled in the corner of an engineer's notebook. Wir haben es nicht gebaut. We did not build it. Back in Ohio, Greaves died in 1953. The coroner said it was a stroke, but the nurse who found him said his eyes were wide open, mouth twisted into something between awe and horror. His notebook, once full of flight logs and test reports, was filled in the final pages with sketches of turbines, spirals, shapes that didn't obey geometry, some in ink, others carved, as if the pen had given way to something sharper. And at the very end, underlined 3 times, it was watching us through the engine. It was watching us through the engine. By 1958, the subject was no longer referred to as Blackbird. Internally, it was now designated Project Sibyl. No one explained why. The name showed up suddenly on internal memos, coded shipments, and black-budget funding requests. The aircraft, still suspended, still untouched, was moved again, this time to a facility that didn't officially exist. Greaves was long dead. Harris vanished. Parker and Johansson never found. Only one man from the original team remained, an intelligence clerk named Eli Ramsey, who had been transferred to a nondescript archive job in Langley. Ramsey was quiet, never spoke of the project, never asked questions. But in 1961, during the Bay of Pigs invasion, a security sweep of internal files revealed something disturbing. Inside Ramsey's desk was a notebook, old, water-stained, written in shaking script. Dozens of pages, each one a series of repeating symbols that matched the cockpit markings from the aircraft. He hadn't been to the hangar in over a decade, but the drawings were exact. That same week, Ramsey jumped in front of a commuter train outside Alexandria, Virginia. He didn't leave a note. But in his coat pocket, investigators found a torn scrap of paper with 5 words, underlined twice. It dreams in the metal. Meanwhile, Project Sibyl expanded. Not publicly, not even within the Pentagon, but in the deepest holes of the Defense Intelligence Agency, in meetings where names weren't spoken and locations were never recorded. The aircraft had changed. Again. Its surface was no longer dull and gray. It had darkened, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Technicians described the fuselage as cold, but thermal readings told a different story. The temperature fluctuated constantly, even when no power was applied. It pulsed. Attempts to dismantle the engine again failed, not because of technical limitations, but because the tools themselves corroded. Metal shavings taken from the inner casing dissolved into a black, tar-like sludge after exposure to air. Electron microscopes fried themselves when the samples were examined too closely. Oscilloscopes picked up waveforms that didn't register on any known scale, frequencies that extended into ultrasonic and subsonic ranges simultaneously. One researcher, a promising young engineer from Northrop, began having seizures after just 1 week of analysis. He claimed the engine was talking to him in his sleep. His roommate found him half-naked in the lab, humming a note so low it shattered 2 fluorescent bulbs. He never worked again. In 1965, under pressure from a clandestine group inside the Atomic Energy Commission, a final test was authorized. A controlled ignition of the Me-262's modified engine inside a sealed chamber beneath Groom Lake. The goal was to observe power-up behavior under extreme conditions, see if the engine could be forced into activation without triggering atmospheric interference. They expected lights, heat, maybe electromagnetic discharge. What they got was silence. For nearly 20 seconds, nothing happened. And then, all at once. Every watch inside the facility stopped. Every screen went black. The base's radar systems recorded a spherical distortion approximately 200 meters wide, centered on the engine. When power returned, the aircraft was gone. Not exploded. Not broken. Gone. The pylons remained. The chamber was intact. But the Me-262 had vanished without trace. Not even dust. A single frame of film survived. Shot by a slow frame-rate reel-to-reel camera, it showed the aircraft in mid-hover, suspended above the ground, and behind it, just for a fraction of a second, something else. A silhouette. Vague, geometric, towering, with what looked like wings, but no symmetry. Like something pretending to be aerodynamic, a shape not meant for flight in atmosphere. The reel was destroyed the next day, but a team member, a contractor named Olson, had already watched it a dozen times. He was found in his hotel bathtub 2 days later. Wrist slashed, the word reflector carved into the tile with a screwdriver. Today, Project Sibyl no longer exists, not on paper, not in memory, but in a locked vault beneath a mountain in Utah. One box remains. Inside it, a single turbine blade, encased in lead glass, monitored 24/7, untouched since 1983. It hums, very faintly, only during electrical storms, and if you press your ear against the glass long enough, you'll hear something breathing. The blade was supposed to be inert, a museum piece for ghosts. After the Groom Lake incident, the Defense Department shut everything down. Funding was erased, documents shredded, people reassigned or, in some cases, disappeared. The official story was that the Me-262 had been an incomplete replica, an experimental frame scrapped before flight. But the truth sat in a titanium vault inside. Section 5 of the Wasatch Range Containment Facility, buried so deep beneath the Utah desert that it didn't appear on geological surveys. No network access. No phones. Only landlines. Only face-to-face briefings. They called it Room Zero. And inside Room Zero sat the turbine blade. Still warm. Still humming. It hadn't degraded in 40 years. No rust. No molecular decay. Not even dust gathered on its surface. Scientists tried to test it for residual radiation. One of the Geiger counters melted. Another shattered. The third simply froze, mid-click, like time around the blade had slowed just enough to kill electricity. One technician said it gave him headaches when he looked directly at it. Not pain exactly, just pressure, like a voice trying to speak. Through his eyes. The blade had been the only component they managed to remove before the plane vanished, or escaped. And the real fear wasn't what it was what it might be calling. In 1987, a linguist from Stanford named Dr. Lena Parrish was granted access to Room Zero. She wasn't military, wasn't intelligence. She specialized in proto-languages, communication, systems older than history itself, cuneiform, linear, pre-Indo-European syntax. But what brought her to Utah wasn't her academic record. It was a small note, scrawled in the margins of a 1946 Operation Lusty Field journal, Harris's journal, the one found after his disappearance. A repeated phrase, written dozens of times between sketches of turbine spirals and strange map-like arcs. It does not use words. It uses reminders. Parrish spent 4 days in Room Zero, observing the blade. On the 5th day, she asked for music. Not just any music, Gregorian chants. She wanted them played in the background, low volume, constantly. Resonance is memory, she told them. Let's see what it wants to remember. By the 7th day, the blade responded. Not physically, not visibly, but the microphones picked up an anomaly, a low tone, barely audible, that matched no frequency present in the room. Not feedback, Not external interference, it pulsed in harmonic steps. 6 pulses. Then 12. Then silence. Parrish recognized the pattern, dot, dot. Fibonacci, a mathematical sequence that appears in everything from sunflower seeds to spiral galaxies, and embedded in the final 6 pulses was something worse, a modulation, not natural, not random, structured. She decoded it, not with math, but with linguistic correlation. The pulses mimicked syntax, language without vowels, grammar without letters, a spoken structure made of timing. She fed it into a primitive speech model and got a result. The computer translated 3 words. Second one found. What second one? That question triggered a full-scale, off-book sweep of every classified facility from Dugway to Diego Garcia. The panic was internal, cold, quiet, invisible to the public. And then, 4 months later, during the decommissioning of a former Nazi weapons depot in Argentina, they found it, a partial fuselage buried under 60 feet of stone, identical geometry. Same alloy, same turbine blade, except this one was cracked. Whatever it had been, it was broken, deformed, melted down from the inside. But the core, still pulsing, like a dying heart. And this one wasn't humming. It was screaming, at frequencies only dogs and radiation sensors could hear. 1 soldier bled from the eyes. 2 others quit the project after hearing voices in their sleep for weeks. Not words, instructions, simple, precise commands in a language they couldn't understand, but instinctively obeyed. The cracked core was sealed and flown in total silence to the same mountain vault. They kept it separate from the first. To this day, no one has put them near each other. Because someone in that secret meeting, in a steel room with no nameplates and no windows, raised a simple, terrible question. What if they're not broken parts? What if they're seeds? And if they are, what are they growing into? And if they are, what are they growing into? The facilities director at the time, a man whose name appeared nowhere on government payrolls, signed the access logs with a symbol, an elongated spiral ending in a broken line. No signature, no rank. Just that mark. That symbol would later be discovered etched into the inside casing of the second turbine core, beneath several millimeters of an alloy that couldn't be cut, burned, or dissolved. And then it happened. The pulse. It struck at 2:17 a.m. on August 12, 1988. Both turbine cores, miles apart, emitted a synchronized frequency burst that lasted 6.4 seconds. Every hard drive within 50 miles of both containment sites wiped simultaneously. Pacemakers stopped. Lights flickered. An earthquake registered. Localized, shallow, and tightly contained. No known fault line was affected. But the data? Gone. Even backups stored off-site, air-gapped and analog, were corrupted. Tapes unraveled, magnetic strips erased. It wasn't power. It was intent. Like something inside those engines had reached out. Not blindly, not randomly, but with precision. Dr. Lena Parrish disappeared 2 days later. No resignation. No warning. The last surveillance footage showed her standing in room 0, staring at the turbine blade. Her eyes were closed. Her mouth was moving, but no sound was recorded. She was speaking to it, or with it. No one knows. Then the footage glitches, just 5 frames, and she's gone. Not a cut, not a fade, just gone. Security forces searched for weeks. No trace. Her apartment was found empty, her car parked in a visitor's slot outside the facility. In her office, a single sticky note remained. 1 line. The third is near water. They began watching lakes, oceans, undersea trenches. Nothing turned up until 1992. A joint Soviet-American oceanographic survey team in the Barents Sea picked up a sonar anomaly, a perfectly symmetrical shape resting on the sea floor 3,000 meters deep. No known submersible had reached it. When they dropped a probe, The signal was scrambled within 20 seconds. The last image captured showed a shape. Familiar. Twin nacelles, swept wings, and something glowing inside the core. The Soviets sealed the site. The Americans let them. The Cold War had unofficially ended, but some things still operated beneath the surface. The third engine, if that's what it was never recovered. But deep-sea sonar buoys still pick up the pulse. Every year. Same time. Same frequency. August 12th, 2:17 a.m., the anniversary of the first synchronized burst. Only now the signal is stronger. Back in Utah, Room 0 was abandoned, not decommissioned. Just left. The blade, still hovering inside its containment prism, hasn't changed. But the room around it has. Instruments fail faster now. Battery life is halved. People entering the chamber report strange static in their ears, even with no electronics. And always, the same phrase appears in their reports, though no one ever mentions it aloud. It wants to finish. No one knows what it is, or what it's finishing. But the implication is clear. This isn't dormant alien technology. It's not even alien. It's patient. In 2001, during a DARPA review of declassified Cold War projects, a junior analyst cross-referenced Me-262 crash sites with abnormal electromagnetic readings recorded from 1945 to 1978. One anomaly stood out, a brief, sharp pulse in New Mexico 3 days before the Roswell incident. The waveform matched the turbine. Pulse. Perfectly. The analyst filed a report. It never made it to review. He was found dead 2 weeks later. Cause? Sudden cardiac arrest. But his laptop, his personal one, had a single file saved on the desktop. Encrypted. When decrypted, it was one sentence. Roswell wasn't the ship. It was the decoy. The engine was already here. Today, Project Sibyl has no office, no budget. But every president since Truman has been briefed. Each one is shown a photo, black and white, faded. The Me-262, suspended in midair inside Groom Lake's testing chamber. The light bending around it, the turbines spinning, and behind it, that impossible silhouette. No two presidents have described it the same way. One called it a false angel. Another said, "It's not a craft, it's a key." Reagan reportedly asked only one question. What happens when the door opens? No one answered him, because no one knows. The door had been theoretical, a metaphor, a way for scientists and intelligence officers to describe the unknown, what the engines might be connected to, or what lay behind the pulses, until the incident in Greenland. It was 2009. A climate research station on the eastern ice shelf, small team, no military presence, recorded a sudden drop in subglacial temperature near an old German weather base, abandoned since 1944. The team sent a drone down into the crevasse. They didn't expect to find a structure. Angular, buried under 200 feet of ice, steel alloy, fused into the rock. Not German, not human. The drone feed cut out 20 seconds after entry. But just before the signal died, the camera captured something unmistakable. A turbine blade, half buried in frost, identical to the one in Room 0. The research team was extracted within hours. Satellite feeds blacked out. U.S. and NATO forces moved in under the guise of a joint climate initiative. But the real team, the black badge unit with no uniforms and no names, called it the Vault. This time, there was no Me-262, no aircraft, just the engine. Still warm, still breathing. 3 containment failures occurred during extraction attempts. The first team suffered mass disorientation. Reports described temporal drift. Men claiming to have lived days inside a chamber where they were gone for only minutes. The second team vanished completely. Their bodies were never recovered. The third team didn't even go inside. They drilled around the object, carved out the surrounding ice, and sealed it in a lead capsule the size of a shipping container. It was flown, without flight logs, to the Wasatch Range, stored near Room 0. They never opened it. They didn't need to, because the moment the container arrived, the blade in Room 0 responded. Saint's glow changed, from faint blue to crimson. Temperature inside the chamber rose 18 degrees in 5 minutes. Power draw in the facility tripled, and then came the second pulse. But this one wasn't just local. This one echoed globally. Submarines in the Indian Ocean reported compass failures. GPS satellites shifted by 103 degrees. Migratory birds changed course. Thousands of people across different continents claimed to dream of a dark machine flying toward a hole in the sky. Most of them had never flown a plane. Some were children. One was blind. All drew the same image: a jet with swept wings, engines glowing like coals, and something riding inside it, not human, staring through the turbine like a glass eye. At Langley, a forgotten archive clerk flagged an old memo. 1947, a scanned page from Harris's original notes, long believed lost. Scribbled beside a diagram of the Me 262's internal wiring were 2 words: reverse seed. That phrase showed up again in a Thai DARPA white paper from 1983 and in the footnotes of a 1996 SETI file that had been accidentally misclassified under microwave burst anomalies. Every time the phrase appeared, it was tied to the same schematic: a closed loop, a mirrored engine, and an output vector that went nowhere, as if energy was vanishing into a place that physics refused to recognize. One engineer, brought out of retirement, stared at the blade in Room 0 for 5 hours without speaking. Finally, he said, "It's not an engine. It's a receiver." The room went silent. "Not for power," he said. "For orders." They kept the blade sealed after that. But something kept changing. Not the object, but the air around it. Compasses spun when you stood too close. Watches stopped. Water condensed on skin in strange patterns, spirals and fractals. People began having shared dreams. Same voice, same phrase: "It wants to finish." And then the countdown began. A low hum, repeating once every 17 hours, shifting, shortening, like a pendulum accelerating. Tick by tick. One researcher described it as a waking heartbeat. Another said it was worse. It's not waking up. It's reaching out. Today, Room 0 is sealed under triple security clearance. Access requires 5 simultaneous biometric scans and 2 verbal keys. Only one person is known to have entered in the last 5 years: a former Air Force pilot. Name: classified. Codename: Echo 1. He flew recon in the Middle East. Never saw combat. But in 2013, he crashed an F-22 in Arizona. Walked away unscathed. Said he saw the jet change. Saw it open. When asked what that meant, he only said, "The engine looked back at me." He is now the only human authorized to stand inside Room 0. Not because he understands it, but because it lets him. They call him Echo 1, but he doesn't answer to it anymore. He hasn't spoken in nearly 3 years. He lives inside a containment chamber adjacent to Room 0, never leaving, never sleeping, never aging in a way that makes sense. His vitals are monitored around the clock. Heart rate, 41 BPM. Body temperature, stable at 33.6 degrees Celsius. Brain activity, anomalous but consistent. He hasn't reacted to anyone, except the turbine blade. Every time the pulses occur, every time the blade hums, he smiles. It's October now, the 28th. Exactly 80 years since the first Me 262 was test-flown on jet power, and for the first time in decades, Room Zero is active. The blade is glowing again, but not faint, not subtle. This time, it's bright enough to see through concrete. Security protocols have failed. Data links are offline. Radiation levels are climbing. The backup generators are running on a loop because the blade is feeding off power like it's hungry. And worst of all, it's not just Room Zero anymore. Every classified storage site where any Me-262 part had been kept, engine fragments, alloy samples, turbine cores, has reported the same frequency signature. Synchronized pulsing, just like 1988, just like Greenland, just like Barents Sea. Only now, the interval is collapsing. What used to be hours between pulses is now seconds. Tick, tick, tick. Faster, louder. Not a countdown anymore. A signal, an activation. In Room Zero, Echo 1 stands in front of the blade, bare feet on steel. His mouth is moving again. No one can hear what he's saying, but the blade does. It responds. Not with light this time, with motion. It turns, not spinning like an engine, but like a lock. The sound is horrible. Metal grinding against reality itself, like bone against concrete. The turbines across the world begin to resonate. The cracked engine in Utah, the sealed core from Greenland, the drowned fuselage beneath the Barents Sea. They all begin to glow. Same color, same rhythm. And then, the turbines sing. It's not a sound you hear, it's a sound you remember. All at once, a shape appears behind the blade in Room Zero, not reflected, cast, like a shadow without a source. Tall, angular, wrong, a structure, a form, a presence. It steps through, not from another room, not from another world, from inside the turbine, as if space had bent in one precise spot and peeled itself open like skin. The lights fail. The facility shakes. People run. Others fall to their knees. The form, black and glimmering like obsidian dust, looks at Echo 1. And then it speaks. No sound, just words that settle in the mind like dust in a grave. Receiver confirmed. Signal complete. All keys retrieved. Phase 1, memory reclamation. Then the turbine vanishes. Not the blade. The whole thing. Echo 1 drops to his knees, eyes wide, bleeding from the nose. He looks at the last surviving camera and mouths something before his heart flatlines. One word. More. And then the feed dies. To this day, no trace of Room Zero remains. Not on blueprints. Not in classified budgets. Not even in black site directories. It's as if it never existed. But in remote corners of the world, something has changed. Pilots report seeing flashes of swept-wing silhouettes at impossible altitudes, moving faster than any known craft. Geologists detect fractures in magnetic fields over historical Me-262 crash sites. And in one forgotten hangar in Bavaria, where it all began, a farmer's son swears he saw a shape sitting in the dark. A jet with no markings, no rust, and engines that were whispering. Inside the Me-262’s engine, U.S. scientists had found something that shouldn't exist. Not in 1945, not ever, because it was never meant to be found. It was meant to be heard, and now that it's done whispering, it's ready to speak.